Okay, so you want to own a restaurant. Find a location, hire a chef, put your name on the awning, watch people fall in love with your food. That's the fantasy. Here's the part that breaks people's brains. The average restaurant in America runs on a profit margin of 3 to 5%. Not 3 to 5% growth. 3 to 5% of every dollar that walks in the door after everything is paid for. Spend $100,000 a month feeding people. And if you're doing well, you keep $3,000 of it. If you're doing badly, and almost half of operators are, you keep nothing at all. This isn't a video about bad chefs or bad locations. This is a video about a business model that's mathematically designed to almost break even, and a handful of structural tricks that separate the restaurants that survive from the ones that don't. So let's do the math on what actually happens to every dollar you make. Here's what nobody tells you before you sign the lease. You don't actually control your biggest expense. You think you do. You pick the menu, you set the prices, you decide what goes in the dish. But two costs eat almost 2/3 of your revenue before you've paid a single bill, and you have limited control over either. The first is food. In 2025, food costs ran between 28 and 35% of sales industry-wide. That's not a static number. It moves with commodity markets you don't touch. Since 2019, food costs are up 38%. A chicken shortage in Georgia shows up on your P&L in Ohio. An egg crisis 3 states away raises your breakfast menu costs whether you raise your prices or not. The second is labor. Since 2019, labor costs are up 35%. And labor isn't like food. You can't just buy less of it on a slow Tuesday. A restaurant needs a minimum number of hands in the kitchen and on the floor regardless of how many tables are full. Skeleton crew on a dead Tuesday still needs a line cook, a dishwasher, at least one server. That's fixed cost wearing a variable cost disguise. Add food and labor together, and you get what the industry calls prime cost. Hold it under 60% of revenue, and you have a fighting chance. Push past 65, and you're playing defense every single week. Here's the trap. Most new owners don't even know this number exists until they're already 6 months into a lease, wondering where all the money went. Genuinely interesting part. This is why fine dining, the segment that looks the most profitable from the outside, actually runs some of the thinnest margins in the industry. 3 to 5% net, same as the industry average, despite charging 4 times as much per plate. The white tablecloth doesn't buy you a better margin. It buys you a more expensive kitchen crew and a much more expensive lease, which cancels out the higher prices almost exactly. The math resets itself no matter how you dress up the room. The restaurant that pays $200 a plate and the diner that pays $12 a plate can land on the exact same margin. That's not a coincidence. That's the structure of the industry pressing down on every concept equally. So food and labor eats 60%. What eats the rest? Rent. And this is where the fantasy gets genuinely dangerous, because rent isn't just a monthly bill. It's a bet you're making on the entire future of a location, locked in for years before you know if the bet pays off. Here's the part that should scare you more than food costs ever will. A restaurant lease routinely runs 6 to 10% of revenue in a normal market, and 12 to 15% in urban markets. With the same square footage that houses a thriving restaurant can just as easily house one bleeding out slowly. You sign that lease before you've served a single customer. You're forecasting 5 years of revenue to justify a number a landlord decided based on the block, not your business. And it gets worse when the real estate isn't even yours to lose gracefully. Let's talk about Red Lobster. In 2014, under then owner Golden Gate Capital, Red Lobster sold off its own real estate and then leased those same buildings back from the new owners. That's called a sale-leaseback. It looks like a smart financial move on a spreadsheet. Unlock the value trapped in your property. Take the cash. What it actually does is convert an owned asset into a permanent, punitive monthly bill that never goes away, no matter how the restaurant performs. Red Lobster went from owning its buildings to renting them at rates set by someone else's return targets. By 2024, Red Lobster was carrying $300 million in debt, weighed down by exactly those leases, on top of declining foot traffic and rising food and labor costs. Then came the final trigger, A promotion so poorly priced it became a case study in its own right. We'll get to the shrimp in a minute. But notice the order of operations here. The real estate decision happened a decade before the bankruptcy filing. The trapdoor was built in 2014. Nobody fell through it until 2024. That's the thing about restaurant real estate. The mistake and the collapse can be separated by 10 years, which means most owners never even connect the two. Now here's where it gets interesting, because there's a second landlord in this business that most people don't think of as a landlord at all. And this one takes a cut of every single sale, not just a fixed check every month. DoorDash and Uber Eats charge restaurants commission tiers of 15, 25, or 30% per delivery order, depending on how much visibility you want inside their app. Sounds manageable at 15%. Except almost nobody stays at 15%, because 15% buys you the smallest delivery radius and the worst placement in search results. Push for real visibility and your effective rate climbs toward 25 to 30. Once you stack on required promotions, processing fees, and refunds, the real cost commonly lands between 30 and 40% of that order's revenue, not the 15% on the homepage. Let's do the math on what that means at scale. A 50-location restaurant brand doing 20 delivery orders per location per day at a $35 average order, running the 30% commission tier, pays out roughly $3.78 million a year, just in commission, just to one app. Remember, the entire business is operating on a 3 to 5% net margin. A single delivery order run through a 30% commission tier doesn't just reduce your profit on that order. It erases it completely, then goes negative. Why would any restaurant use these apps at a loss? Because the apps aren't selling delivery. They're selling visibility to a customer base that would never have found you otherwise. New faces who might come back and order direct, where you keep the full margin. Used correctly, the commission functions like an advertising spend, not a delivery fee. Used carelessly, restaurants use it as an actual revenue channel and quietly bleed on every single order, without ever running the numbers to notice. Here's the part that should really bother you. On that same commission structure, restaurants also lose access to who the customer even is. No name, no email, no order history. DoorDash and Uber Eats own the relationship, not you. Every dollar spent building loyalty through the app trains a customer to be loyal to the app's rewards program, not to your restaurant. That's the trapdoor under digital ordering. You pay for the visibility, and the platform keeps the relationship. Anyway, if this kind of breakdown is useful to you, this channel exists to do exactly this for one real business every single week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. So let's go back to Red Lobster, because the ending of that story is the cleanest lesson in the entire industry about what happens when you get one number badly wrong. In 2020, Thai Union, a Bangkok-based seafood supplier, became Red Lobster's largest shareholder with 49% control. Thai Union had been supplying Red Lobster with shrimp for over 30 years. Now they were also sitting on the board deciding menu strategy. In 2023, under Thai Union's direction, Red Lobster took its limited-time endless shrimp promotion, a deal that had run successfully as an occasional event for 20 years, and made it a permanent, everyday menu item. Here's why that one decision was catastrophic, and it comes straight back to prime cost. Endless shrimp wasn't priced against how much shrimp the average customer eats. It was priced as a bet that most people would stop after a plate and a half. Customers didn't stop. Reports of diners eating over 100 shrimp in a single sitting circulated the internet, and every single one of those meals was running Red Lobster's food costs far past the 60% danger line we talked about in segment 1. The promotion cost the company $11 million in a single quarter. It gets worse operationally, not just financially. Customers camping at tables for hours to maximize their shrimp count meant fewer table turns per night, longer wait times, and a kitchen and waitstaff pushed past capacity on every shift the promotion ran. The new CEO, Damal Adamalikan, later described it plainly. You stress the kitchen, you stress the servers, you stress the host stand, and people can't get a table. That's not a marketing failure. That's a pricing model that ignored the exact same math every restaurant in this video is built on. Combine an $11 million a quarter promotion with $300 million in sale-leaseback debt and years of declining foot traffic, and you get the full picture. Red Lobster filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in May 2024. Nearly 100 stores closed in the lead up to the filing. Over 500 more had their future thrown into uncertainty during the restructuring. Here's the reframe. Endless Shrimp didn't sink Red Lobster by itself. It was the final stress test on a structure that had already been quietly failing for a decade. Punitive leases from 2014, rising food and labor costs nobody adjusted pricing for, and ownership more interested in moving shrimp inventory than protecting the brand. The promotion just made the failure visible all at once, instead of slowly, the way restaurant failures usually happen. So if independent restaurants and legacy chains are fighting for scraps on a 3 to 5% margin, who's actually winning in this industry? The answer tells you everything about what separates a restaurant that survives from one that doesn't. Chipotle posted a restaurant-level operating margin of 25.4% in 2025. Read those two numbers side by side. The average independent restaurant nets 3 to 5%. Chipotle nets over 25%. Same industry, same rising food costs. Chipotle's own food, beverage, and packaging costs sat at 29.2% of revenue, right in line with the industry average we talked about in segment 1. So it isn't that Chipotle escapes the prime cost problem. It's that Chipotle has restructured everything else around it. Here's the mechanism. A limited menu means less waste and simpler purchasing at massive scale. Buying power an independent restaurant will never have access to. A production line kitchen layout means fewer labor hours per order than a full-service kitchen needs. And most importantly, fast casual formats like Chipotle largely sidestep the two landlord problem we spent this whole video on. Lower square footage than a full-service restaurant means a smaller rent bill relative to sales, and a huge share of their volume now moves through owned digital channels and pickup lanes rather than 30% commission delivery apps. This is the part that should reframe how you think about the entire industry. Restaurant economics don't reward good food. They reward structural efficiency. Two restaurants can serve equally good meals and land 20 points of margin apart, purely because one of them solved the labor, rent, and delivery commission math, and the other one didn't. That's also exactly why franchising exists as a category. A franchisee isn't just buying a brand name and a recipe. They're buying a system that has already solved prime cost, already negotiated better supplier pricing than any independent could get alone, and already tested exactly how small a kitchen footprint can be before quality breaks. The franchise fee is expensive specifically because someone else already paid the tuition on getting the math right. You're paying to skip the years most independent owners spend learning it the hard way, if they survive long enough to learn it all. The restaurant business was never really about the food. It's about who solved the arithmetic first. Let's put the whole picture together, because there's a final piece that changes how you should read every number in this video. Between 14 and 30% of new restaurants close within their first year. That's not a random accident spread evenly across bad concepts and lazy owners. It's what happens when someone opens a restaurant believing the food is the business, when the food was only ever the entry ticket. The actual business is prime cost discipline, a real estate decision that won't blow up for a decade, and a delivery strategy that doesn't quietly cannibalize the only margin you had. Here's the uncomfortable version of that idea. The restaurants that survive aren't always the ones with the best food. They're the ones run by owners who treated 60% prime cost as a hard ceiling instead of suggestion, who read every lease like it was a 10-year bet instead of a monthly bill, and who use delivery apps as a discovery tool instead of a revenue stream. The plate in front of the customer is the smallest part of the business. Everything that actually determines whether the restaurant survives happens somewhere the customer never sees, in the lease terms, in the commission tiers, in the supplier contracts signed months before opening night. You don't own a restaurant. You own a set of contracts wrapped around a kitchen, and the kitchen is the only part anyone claps for. And here's the thing that connects everything we just covered to a business almost nobody thinks of the same way, because it runs on the exact same trap, just inverted. A restaurant survives on thin margins because food and labor are unpredictable and expensive to control. A grocery store survives on margins even thinner than that, often under 2%, for the opposite reason. The food isn't the profit center at all. What actually pays the bills in a grocery store has almost nothing to do with the groceries. If you thought the two landlord problem in this video was brutal, wait until you see what's really funding the shelf space in the store where you buy your milk. That's the next one, the economics of owning a grocery store.